In fifth grade, we are ready for math lesson 158 today. We're going to start off with some concept cards. First of all, I have some fractions, and I want you to, because they are improper, change them to mixed or whole numbers. And then we're going to go over our fractions. Not our fractions, our formulas. 10 over 2 can be changed to 5. 4, 3, 3 and 3/4, 4 and 1/6, 2, 4 and 4/5, 8 and 2/9, 9 and 1/6, 5 and 3/7. What is the formula for converting from Fahrenheit to Celsius? F equals 5 over, back up. C equals 5 over 9 times, in parentheses, F minus 32. Now Celsius to Fahrenheit. F equals 9 over 5 times C plus 32. Formula for the area of a square. A equals S times S. Formula for the perimeter of a square. P equals 4 times S. Perimeter of a rectangle. P equals, in parentheses, 2 times L plus, in parentheses, 2 times W. And area of a rectangle. A equals length times width. So first of all, we talked yesterday in our lesson about rounding mixed numbers to whole numbers. So let's go ahead and do that with a couple mixed numbers here on the board. So remember, if our fraction is more than 1/2, you round it up to the next whole number. And if it's less than 1/2, you just drop your fraction. So 7 and 11 over 15, is that closer to 8 or 7? So would this be greater than 1/2 or less than 1/2? 11 over 15 is greater than 1/2. So we're going to change our 7 to an 8 and drop the fraction. Now we have 16 and 5 over 12. So is 5 over 12 more or less than 1/2? It is less than 1/2, so we simply drop that and we're left with 16. We rounded it to the nearest whole number. In our lesson today, we are changing fractions to decimals. So I have some here. I have some fractions on these cards. Now, if we want to change 1/10 to a decimal, we would simply write the decimal 1/10. Or 9,000th, we would write the decimal 9,000th, right? Or 1,000th, we would write the decimal 1,000th. What about 700th? We would write the decimal 700th. It's fairly simple when we are working with powers of 10 to change our fraction to a decimal. But what about if they are not powers of 10? Are we still able to do that? So look at this fraction with me, 1/10. Remember that in a fraction, this fraction bar here is also called a division bar, which means to divide your numerator by your denominator. So if we want to change 1/10 to a decimal, we know already that it's just 1/10. But another way to do that would be to take our fraction and go 1 divided by 10, because this is a division bar. 1 divided by 10. Now, we talked about dividing when we need to annex zeros. Add a decimal point beside the whole number and annex zeros. So if you look closely at this problem, you can see we cannot divide right now. So we're going to do what we learned about that. Add our decimal point and annex a 0. Now, we're going to take 10 into 10. So 10 goes into 10 one time, of course. 10 times 1 is 10. So we're going to subtract and we're left with 0. Now we need to add our decimal point here. Now what is our answer? Our answer is 1/10. That's not surprising, right? It should not be surprising because 1/10, the fraction is the same as the decimal 1/10. But now we know that it works to take a fraction, divide the numerator by the denominator, and that gives you your decimal. So let's try that with some other fractions. We have 5/8 here on the board, and we want to change that to a decimal, but we do not know in our head what decimal it would be. So division bar means go 5 divided by 8. Now, as you can see again, we cannot take 8 into 5, so we're going to have to annex a 0, add a decimal point after the whole number, and annex a 0. Remember, it does not change the value of the dividend if we add zeros after the decimal point. So now we're going 50 divided by 8, which is 6. So we have 6 times 8 is 48. So we're subtracting here. We have 2. Now we have to annex another 0 because our problem did not terminate yet. 8 goes into 20 2 times. Subtract 16. Now again, our problem did not terminate or divide out evenly yet, so we need to divide again. 40 divided by 8 is 5. 8 times 5 equals 40. So if we subtract, we are left with 0, and now our problem terminated. So if we add our decimal point up here, now we have our fraction, 625,000. So 5/8 equals the decimal 625,000, okay? You can simply divide the numerator by the denominator and you will get your decimal. You can add a decimal point after the whole number in your dividend and annex as many zeros as you need to until your problem terminates. So let's go ahead and work our second problem here, 3/4. We want to find the decimal value, so we're going to go 3 divided by 4, since this is a division bar. Okay, 4 goes into 30 7 times. And just notice how I added a decimal point and annexed a 0. So now we have 28, subtract, bring down. We have 2 left here. Now we need to annex another 0 because it did not terminate yet. And 4 goes into 20 5 times. So we're going to subtract 20 and we're left with 0, which means our decimal is 7/500. So the fraction 3/4 is the same as the decimal 7/500. Anytime, if you have a fraction and you want the decimal value, just divide your numerator by the denominator. Add a decimal point and annex zeros if you need to. Now look in your lesson today on page 285, in the yellow box at the top of the page, they have a box inside the box with some fraction decimal equivalents that are used often, and those are good to memorize. Just look over them a few times. Those are fractions, as it says, that are used often. So instead of having to write out and divide it every time that you want to know the decimal for that fraction, if you just know them in your head, that will be helpful. So for 1/2, it's 0.5, 1/4, 0.5 or 5/10 would be the proper way to read that. 1/4 and 25/100, 3/4 and 75/100, 1/5 and 2/10, 2/5 and 4/10. I'll let you finish reading those on your own. Let's just go over yet how to round off decimals. So remember, if we want to round a decimal, we have to, let's just look at an example here. So I have 7/300, and let's round these to the nearest tenth, to 10th place. These are the 10th place. So if you're rounding to the 10th place, go ahead and maybe let's draw an arrow like we normally do, actually. Draw an arrow to the number that you're rounding and underline your determining digit. So this is the number that we will change if we change a number. Our determining digit tells us if we need to make it higher or leave it the same. So we have to have one more decimal place than the place that we're rounding. If we're rounding to the 10th place, we have to have a 100th place. If it says round to the 100th place, you have to have a 1000th place to be able to round it. So this would be 7/10 because this is a 3. Here we would have 9/10, and here we would have 6/10 because that is a 5. Work your lesson carefully today. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in language class.